welcome to another episode of the Transportation Exchange podcast presented by Rush Truck Centre Canada. I'm your host, Jason Cuddy, and joining us again today is James Menzies, the editor at today's Trucking and Truck News. James, welcome back.
Thanks, Jason. I think that I was hoping when we'd have this session that we'd be having turned the corner and we'd have with times would be booming as they were 2 years ago, but not exactly. It's taking a little longer than we expected to.
I agree. Yeah. So it's always fun to do this. We did one, obviously halfway through, and it's always neat to see what we got right, kind of what we got wrong. But yeah, the industry's, still kind of in flux, but I guess let's dig through as we normally do. Let's start kind of what's the vibe on trailers? What's it looking like out there?
You don't want to be a trailer salesperson right now. I know you guys sell trailers too, and I don't know what you're seeing on the ground, but the numbers of orders being placed with the manufacturers are really, really low right now for a couple of reasons. Number one, fleets are cash strapped. And second of all, when they do have some CapEx available, they tend to want to buy new power units right now because we have a new emission standard coming in a couple of years. And they feel that this is a time to get some of those orders in for new power units, which is leaving the trailer dealers sort of on the sideline, waiting for things to pick back up. So it's been kind of sluggish for the trailer makers, and some of them are starting to curtail production a little bit and ramp down their build rates.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of see it here. Obviously, it's quiet, I guess is the best way to say it. And to your point, right? There's only so much cash kind of coming into the business, and knowing what's coming down the pipe. As we dig into like the Class 8 orders is. There's some emission challenges that you're trying to get in front of from a cost point of view. So it's really leveraging your cash flow to maximize kind of the spend, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess from that, what have you seen, from all the OEMs, like a bit of an uptick in the Class 8?
And just getting back to trailers for a second, one trend that we did see over the last couple of years is that fleets were buying more trailers per power unit.
Gotcha.
And they were doing that because it was go, and they wanted to keep their drivers they're doing more drop and hook, dropping trailers, and less live load, non-live, and whatnot. But now that trend, I think, as kind of as the freight market has slowed down, that trend has kind of gone away, and now fleets are
scaling back to the old ratio.
The old ratio, yeah, exactly. So, but on the Class 8 side, the fleets or the OEMs just recently opened up their order books for 2025.
Right.
And I think they were expecting to see in late 2024 an uptick in demand because of the EPA 27 emission standards. It's been no secret that that's going to add about $25,000, $30,000 to a Class 8 truck, and that's U.S. money, of course. So that hasn't materialized, and one reason could be that there's a lot of uncertainty, or was a lot of uncertainty about the U.S. election and what would happen with these emission standards under a new Trump administration. Now that we know that that's what we're going to be dealing with, the question remains: what will become of those emission standards? So I think that they were a little slower than expected coming out of the gate as the OEMs open up their order boards for 2025, but it's only a matter of time before that demand's going to come back.
Agreed. Yeah, I think we're seeing that too. I think there was, from our end at dealership level, there was, I'd say, a spike in interest in quoting, probably start of the fall,
Mm-hmm.
And some of it obviously is, you get the retail part kicks in. So if there's a bit more demand, they start kind of looking at it. But it's definitely kind of, I'd say, quiet off a bit. You have your standard, RFPs and stuff coming in. And I think part of maybe what's driving it is, like you said, the order boards have just opened up. So that's, new pricing's coming out, all that's coming out. But with the order board opening up, you've got the build times are now coming down from what they used to be, right? So before, the last couple of years, you had to just get your order in, right, just to make sure it got built that year. Well, I think, for a lot of OEMs, it's a more manageable order board. Things are kind of not where they used to be, but definitely, you don't have those 6, 8, 9 month delays on majority of the products. So you can now, as a fleet, kind of budget a little bit better and say, okay, we wait towards the end of the year, buy in the beginning of the year. Let's see what really happens with the Trump part. And also, the dollar's not great, right? So, a couple of years ago, $1.20, $1.25, we're up to about $1.40. So, I mean, again, with the U.S. currency and not in your favor, you're not in a big rush to spend the money if you think the dollar's going to get strong. You're kind of, to your point, I think everyone's just kind of waiting it out, right? Really see what kind of shakes out between the election. If the dollar gets better, what's the market like? And then where do we start investing in? Because if you don't have to get the build dates, then you have a bit more leeway than you did the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that a lot of fleets are taking a wait and see approach. They thought that the market would have turned by now. And for the market to turn, there's got to be some more capacity that leaves, unfortunately, for those that aren't going to survive.
Yeah.
But they've been very resilient. Whether that's because they did so well in the couple of years preceding this recession that they were able to stock up a lot of cash. Another theory we hear is that lenders are reticent to foreclose on these companies because right now the used truck market isn't that strong. And then if you flood the market with used trucks, what kind of a return are the lenders going to get on that? So for whatever reason, the capacity hasn't thinned out as you would think it would under these tough conditions. And that just, I think, brings more uncertainty to the stronger fleets as terms of what they want to buy. One segment that seems to be bucking the trend, I don't know if you're seeing this, but private fleets.
Yes.
Private fleets have been buying a lot of trucks, bringing more of their freight in-house because they got caught out during the COVID pandemic and they didn't have the control of the supply chain that they liked. Then they ended up paying extraordinary rates for a year or two after that.
Right.
And I think they've decided we want to control our own destiny. So they've been buying trucks all along.
Agreed.
And that has kind of prolonged the pain for the for-hire carriers because there's less freight out there because those that have private fleets are pulling more of that in and adding equipment.
Yeah, I know for sure the private fleets definitely run on a different, mindset, right? It's not an up and down kind of market based. It is market based, but they're their own customer, right? So they can control it a little bit better. They can manage the fleet a bit better. When it got lean, they could spread things out, run some, maybe there's a bit more maintenance cost, but then they could manage it a little bit easier, right? But yeah, once I think the doors opened back up, they were one of the first ones that could confidently go in and buy new equipment because they knew what the demand was, because they knew already what they had to replace. And it was irrelevant kind of what the market rate is. That didn't affect them, right? They have product to move for their own businesses. So regardless, it's got to go. So they were kind of the first ones at the door when things were opening up and you could get things quicker. I agree. They were the first ones kind of loading up before all the for-hire carriers were, for the most part.
Okay, and the for-hire carriers tend to be buying at replacement levels.
Right.
They're replacing those trucks they have to, but they're not growing. Correct. And we haven't seen a lot of M&A either. They're not growing through acquisition. Sometimes when that happens, they inherit a fleet with some older equipment that they need to replace. That's not happening a lot. And also, they're not growing organically. Yeah, because the freight's not there.
And the other segment we do see, I would say, maybe not growth, but consistency is the medium duty, right? Usually that's tied to a lot of private fleets as well. But just in general, that seems to be steady.
Yeah,
right? It hasn't dropped, hasn't peaked.
Yeah,
it is less volatile.
Yeah.
So we're kind of seeing that as well. So that is always nice to see because that's kind of your smaller businesses, right? So it does show that the smaller businesses seem to be surviving through it and replacing when they need to replace. But they're definitely not taking a hit, but they also aren't booming either.
Right. The other segment that's doing better than Class 8 line haul, and I've been in the States a lot recently, and I'm hearing this is especially true down there with all the infrastructure spending, is vocational.
Right.
Vocational demand, like medium duty, it's been steadier, and it hasn't seen the big drop-off that Class 8 tractors have. So are you seeing that too in Canada?
Yeah, I think vocational is strong. The challenge has just been with the vocational compared to a Class 8 is there's more touch points, right? So there's the chassis itself, but then it usually goes to a very specialty outfitter. And there, in the past, there has been significant time delays, and you've got to time it, right? Those ones require a lot of timing, right? Like Class 8, you can drop a new truck in kind of whenever. If you're going to drop in a mixer or a dump truck, it's got to land for the season. Right. So if by the time the chassis is built and if the body gets upfitted 2 months after the season started, that truck's no good for anybody, for that season.
Right.
Like, they're not going to recoup their money that year. So that is the tricky part of it. Right. But demand, I agree, demand is there for it, right? Okay. You've got the tenders out from the municipal level for the plow segments, but the mixers, the dump trucks, I'd say it's been a healthy demand. Okay. And it's just really lining up the upfitting, the time frame to meet that demand. But definitely, to your point, it's been strong.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We talked about for the last couple of years we've been doing this. We've always constantly bumped up against supply chain challenges. Components, microchips and this and that. I think all that noise has probably settled down. Have you heard anything, or is there anything you're seeing kind of surfacing or kind of slowing things down in any segment?
It's funny because it did get awfully quiet and we weren't hearing about the long delays, but then something pops up. It's almost like whack-a-mole. There's always something else that pops up. I know there was a mirror factory fire in Mexico earlier this year, and that supplier supplies the vast majority of the commercial vehicles in North America. So that affected all the OEMs, or most of the OEMs anyways. Yeah. And for a while there, they couldn't produce any trucks because they didn't have mirrors. They were producing the trucks, but they couldn't finish them. Right. They would have to find a place to go park them, just like during the COVID period where they couldn't get this or that or whatever component. And you can't deliver the truck without mirrors. So that was a challenge. And then it just seems like there's just when you think that the problem's solved, there's another shortage that crops up. Yeah. But what that's leading to, we heard this term nearshoring all the time, where manufacturers are trying to get closer to their suppliers and source supplies from maybe Mexico that used to come from China. Right. And I think that will help. Eventually, you don't flick a switch and resolve that overnight, but I think that will help with some of those supply chain issues as well. So we don't hear about them all the time like we used to, but they still pop up.
Yeah, the mirror one was a frustrating one to go through, and it's one of those things. What do you do, right? Yeah. It is what it is. I think they work through it as best they can. But yeah, it's one of those things you can't really drive a truck without mirrors, right? So
Exactly.
it really slows everybody down.
Yeah, one of the things the OEMs I think are doing a much better job of now is they're getting closer to their suppliers, understanding their businesses better, and they're being more transparent with them in terms of what types of demand they expect them to see, and really treating them as partners. Not just a supplier that ships you something that you tack onto the truck, but getting into that business and understanding, okay, what's your capacity? This is what we're going to need. Are you going to be able to meet our needs? Should we be sourcing another supplier? So I think that the COVID supply shortage has really, really led to some positive change going forward with the OEMs and their suppliers. They're just working a lot more closely together.
Yeah, I agree. I think we see it, right? We hear it when we're on the calls, from our end, and they're talking about the supplier relationships. And, part of it is even like from the dealership to the factory is, making sure we're not making last minute changes that, so they can work through, getting ahead of it and having stuff, on the line ready to go by a certain date. So that, if there is an issue, we've got a bit of a lead time to figure out a plan. It's not just in time. You can't change it, something the last day before it gets built. So trying to control that too, right?
Yeah, and I think the customer's mindset has changed too. If they can't get their Michelins, but they can get Goodyears, they can get that truck a few weeks sooner, they're gonna make that change. A lot of the fleets I've talked to have been more flexible with their specs because they've come to realize that, okay, if I can't get the part that I want, well, that truck could be sitting there for a few months before I get it. I could spec a different part and get that truck a lot sooner. And for the most part, I mean, those tier one suppliers are all producing good quality product.
Agreed. Yeah. And then usually something you can change out in the back end anyways at some point, right? So it's at least they get the truck out going, generating some revenue for them. And then, you can tweak it, for the most part afterwards. So yeah, we saw it a lot too is, it was a lot of things guys always had. It's like, oh, we can't get this or we can get it, but it's just delayed, okay, forget it. Well, so there is, some fleets running some, mixed smash specs, as far as compared to how they would normally order it. And but they'll weed that out as we kind of get back on track as well. But it does show you that a lot of stuff, obviously there's preference and there's a reason behind what they do, but it's nice to know they found a way to kind of keep going and just keep the business running even though it's not ideal to their exact spec.
Right.
Since we last talked, a nice part is the interest rates are coming down, right? So that does help. Have you seen? Obviously we're not seeing the massive intake in orders per se, but from talking to carriers and the issue, does that give them a little bit more optimism as potentially looking at some business?
Sure. I think on two fronts, acquiring new equipment and acquiring new companies.
Right.
The borrowing cost now is it looks, at least it's trending in the right direction. It's not what it used to be, but it's not as bad either. And I was just recently at an event where an economist spoke, and he thinks that the Bank of Canada is going to bring down interest rates further over the next year, further and faster than other of our peers out there. Because and that'll be good news. That'll be good news for everyone in business, particularly those that are looking at buying ever more expensive equipment.
Yeah, that's true. As the price goes up, the interest rates, if they come down, at least it helps mitigate some of the bump. It's not all of it, but having two going in the same direction is not a good thing.
Right, exactly.
For sure.
While your costs are going up as well.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, right, mergers and acquisition, that becomes, that's going to be a factor, right? If the interest rates are going down, it can make a merger that was, or an acquisition that was kind of an idea, maybe a bit more reality at this point, right? Because the capital is a little bit less expensive to obtain, so it becomes a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
And we touched on it briefly. So now we've got some certainty of the next 4 years in the U.S. However you take it, but that's what it is. And I guess the one thing that comes out of it is like, how much is it going to change? I think the big question is, CARB. How much is this going to change CARB? And I think the understanding is I don't think we're going to see much change. Maybe some stagnation of the growth of it. Yeah. But I don't know. What are you hearing as far as? It's early.
Well, I wouldn't anticipate any change out of CARB because that's the state level board in California. But I think that EPA, which is under the federal purview, is it's a wild card. Yeah. What are they going to do? So we've got these expensive new emission standards coming in 2027. The OEMs have already spent hundreds of millions coming up with solutions to meet those.
Yeah.
And how are they ever going to recover that investment if these EPA regs are curtailed, or if they're kicked down the can, or the can is kicked down the road, or if they're canceled altogether? That doesn't really benefit the OEMs. Now the fleets would probably welcome that because they see the cost increase that's coming their way with these regs. What will they do? I think that there's three camps right now that I hear from. There's a camp that will, having still fresh memories from COVID, allocation, seeing how that worked or didn't work for them last time, they will pre-buy and they'll start doing so next year so they can get those build slots in 2026 and then they can defer the higher cost of the new equipment that's coming in 2027. there's other fleets, and some of the biggest fleets that I've heard from at events say that they're not going to pre-buy. It's just too disruptive, and they're going to hope that the market rates will help offset these costs. And then the third camp, I think, is the camp that just is counting on Trump to do something drastic and kill these altogether. And hope is not really a strategy, but I think there is that camp that's waiting to see it and hope that these emissions regulations will just be deferred or killed.
Yeah, so I guess it's one of those time will tell, right? Until the administration's up and running and things get going, there's one thing you can say on a campaign trail, but once you get into office and see kind of how deep things are, maybe it's a different mindset, right? And I guess we will not know until probably Q2 almost of next year, kind of what if anything is happening, which brings us right into that pre-buy, right? To your point, we're expecting a massive bump in engine costs, unfortunately, to meet EPA and CARB regulations for 27. Interest rates going down, waiting now to elections over, like maybe now we'll start seeing a bit of that pre-buy effect. We thought when we talked, in midway through the year that it would be ramping up quicker, I think, than it is.
Yeah. And, this is the first emissions round of regulations where the fleets don't have a whole lot to look forward to from it. And in the past, fuel economy is going to improve substantially.
Yes.
This time, not so much, but the warranties are going to be longer. Will the fleets get any benefit from that? Well, most of them will flip their trucks in 3-4 years before that extended warranty even takes effect.
Yes.
So will the residual value be better on the back end? A lot that we don't know yet, and that's going to all factor into how they manage their equipment replacement cycles.
Yeah, the warranty part's interesting. To your point, a lot of the fleets will flip 3 to 4 years, depending on mileage, traditionally. So they'll usually go with an extended warranty to cover kind of that time frame, and that's it. So, the benefit of the extended warranty or the longer warranty from the OEM is not going to directly benefit them in running their fleet. But to your point, it may have a value in the used market, right? Because traditionally they would get rid of them when the warranty's done.
Right.
So now here's trucks 3-4 years old going to market that still have some sort of warranty on them that wasn't there before. So that may give a boost to the used market potentially, right? But then the other turnkey will be how much of that can be brought into California, into CARB states, right? So there's going to be that challenge, right? If they're not CARB compliant, if they are, great, but not all the warranties, not everyone's buying fully out CARB compliant vehicles, right?
Yeah.
So it'll still be interesting to see how that plays out over time.
It will be, and the flip side to that, they might not get a huge benefit in fuel economy. There should be a modest benefit, but maybe not a huge benefit. At the same time, there's very little risk of having any widespread reliability issues because it's kind of more of the same of what's already on the truck. The base engine doesn't change much.
Right.
They're adding, I guess, some heaters to the after treatment system so it gets up and performing the moment that you turn the key.
Right.
Subtle changes like that, but nothing that should scare fleets.
No, and I think when it first came out and it was presented to us a couple of years ago and we went through this and we talked about the price bump, I think a lot of price bump people were seeing as like mechanical, like a big change to the engine is causing a large, increase in cost. And there are some changes you mentioned that everything's got to be kind of running at turnkey versus, now where it's not. So there is some, but the bulk of it is that warranty component. I think is where that cost is coming from.
I think you're right, yes.
That, wasn't necessarily explained a couple of years ago, but now as we're getting closer, the details are coming out. People can kind of see where it's coming from. So to your point, it takes away that, we're running all brand new engines. Every OEM's running brand new engines for, 27, which isn't necessarily the case.
That's right. Yeah.
So which it gives you some comfort.
Yes.
Right? Which is kind of good. So based on all that, and we like to do this, what what do we think at least the first half of 25 looks like?
Well, I think when we talked about this in the first half of 2024, what we expected to see by now hasn't happened yet, so it's just been pushed further out.
Yeah.
But 2025, they say that it can't get any worse than 2024.
Yeah.
I think that most of the economists I've heard, especially those that focus on trucking, say that it will get a little bit better next year, but they're not expecting it to get big time better.
Gotcha.
And the reason for that is that the freight volumes never fell off the cliff. Like the freight is there.
Right.
There's just way too much capacity chasing that freight. And it's just been so slow to exit. And that's going to have to happen. And it's just happening at a very slow pace. So I haven't heard anyone say that 2025 is going to be a worse year for trucking.
Right.
Nor have I heard anyone say it's going to be a much better year for trucking. It's going to be
pretty much flat.
Yeah, flat. Whereas Bob Costello, the chief economist for the American Trucking Association, said it's going to be a return to normal. It's going to feel like 2019, which wasn't a great year, but it wasn't a bad year. And after the last couple years or year and a half, I think fleets would welcome a return to normal. So, so that's that's my takeaway from a lot of the events I've attended this fall, and a lot of the economists I've heard, and a lot of the forecasters are saying some improvement. It's going to feel better.
Right.
It's not going to be booming like it was post-COVID.
Fair. Yeah, I know. So it'll be interesting how that rolls out. And to your point, as the vehicles get a bit more expensive, that may even flush out some other carriers that are just kind of floating by, right? There are going to be some regs that are going to, kind of strangle a few guys that are kind of running very old equipment that's not going to meet certain capacity and, get into certain states. So, over time that may flush itself out potentially, and which would then bring the rates up a bit. So yeah, it's stagnant, return to normal. But it'll be interesting to see what it does, because if there's any mergers and acquisition, that can take some different players out, bring rates up. So, it'll be interesting to see what shakes out. But yeah, I agree. From everything we're seeing, it's just kind of status quo.
Status
right?
quo. Yeah.
For the most part, the requests in the RFPs and that are, normal volumes. Nothing, no one's loading up from the last 2 years plus what they normally do, right? Everyone's just kind of going through the norm. And I think because everyone spent the last couple of years figuring out how to rejig their fleet and their time frame, their maintenance, that, we don't have that big glut of trucks like we did 2-3 years ago, where guys are like 2-3 years behind their buy cycle. I think everyone's caught up or figured out a way to make do with the new norm as far as the time frame they're going to run the vehicles. So you don't have the big tidal wave of new orders. So, but the pre-buy could still be the pre-buy, right?
Yeah, and the wild card is what happens in the United States. What will their policy around tariffs do for imports? They might not affect us directly, but there's always a trickle down whenever the U.S. Changes how it manages its supply chain or imposes tariffs on foreign goods. So I think that's a bit of a wild card too, that everyone's going to wait and see for a little bit what this administration is going to do, and that could dictate how the trucking industry fares and how freight rebounds over the next year.
Yeah, I agree. That's the unknown too, right? Because you have a lot of the OEMs are not all produced in the U.S. There are some factories, obviously, for I think all the others have some sort of footprint, but a lot of them have footprints in Mexico and even in Canada, right? So you're going to tariff the outside countries, you're going to impact your industry pretty hard. So, it's one thing, again, set on the campaign trail. Once you dig into it, is it, maybe it's specific to certain industries or whatever. And, obviously as a very broad comment, it doesn't, define a certain industry per se. But, to your point, if there is something generally slapped across, that could do, some significant, cost damage to a lot of the OEMs as far as bringing equipment into the U.S. and into Canada, through some place like Mexico, where a lot of factories are currently there, right? So
absolutely.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We'll do this again in 6 months and see what we got right and see what we got wrong.
Okay, always look forward to it.
Excellent. Well,
thanks, Jason.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thanks. That concludes today's episode. And to catch up on past episodes, check out transportationexchangepodcast.ca. Until next time, thanks for watching.